Hello, I'm Josh.
I'm Josh.
I'm not Josh.
And I'm half Josh. And together we are...
Joshing around in air.
Yes, love it.
I've been doing it forever.
I know, right? Jamie, I feel like you've very well melded into our kind of, I don't know, the way we say our intro. Like it didn't feel like it was out of place or anything.
It's the alliteration of my name. That's the real key, I think.
Yeah. No, it's brilliant.
Although we very clearly set out this room as well, where it's like there's a dividing line down the middle, and there's the Jays on that side of the room, and then there's me on this side of the room. Like, can I come and play as well, please?
You can absolutely come and play. You can be a Josh today.
Jamie, you brought us a wonderful beverage. As we know, we like to have the real Conquest happy hour here, which is the consumption of alcohol.
I'd say shots fired, but this might be relevant.
Yeah. But right. Yeah. What have you brought for us?
So from the far and distant reaches of East Asia, I have brought a Korean spirits called soju. It was supposedly brought over by the Mongolians, and they taught them how to make it, and they absolutely love it. It is a very nice drink, but you have to be careful. It's very smooth, and it can escalate wildly if you attack it properly. But I bring it as my offering to the true Conquest happy hour.
Thank you very much.
So I'm going to pour this out now, and the reason why I very carefully went and picked up the bottle and the glass so that we could have a really nice sound of this sort of cracking open, and I was expecting this to be a glass bottle, and it isn't. It's like a bottle of pop. So I'm going to pour some of this out now. Let's see if we get anything off it.
I noticed the thing on the top. It looks like the thing you have on like a bottle of Nurofen or something. Is it like a push in to like crack open bottle or?
No, but it has a smell of medicine, which is always good, isn't
it? We brought a lot of this across from South Korea for our wedding last year. And my wife is from South Korea, which I think we had to bring about 20 kilos of soju as part of wedding favours on the way, which was an interesting one to bring through customs. Especially all came in these little sort of, like the juice box cartons where you poke the straw through. Yeah. They came in that kind of a carton shape as well, so it was very peculiar.
It smells like vodka.
What's the traditional
like nicer
Korean cheers?
I would honestly not offer it because my wife might hear me and I would offend her and all of my in-laws.
Great,
but I think cheers will do universally for us now.
Instead of going for the risky, let's all guess what they say.
Well,
cheers.
Cheers.
That's like drinking water. That's so smooth.
I told you it's dangerous.
It's kind of like half the experience of sipping vodka, but without like the burn. So it's like the flavour.
You get the little bit of the warmth in your chest after you finish that, but you don't get that kind of stinging tense in your mouth having just gone and pushed it down you. But yeah, it's a very popular drink. You'll get it quite often, usually in little shot glasses. It was quite common, and you will toast the shot, you'll down it. There's not say so much traditions as such, but you don't pour the drink for yourself. You pour for each other, and it's good manners to make sure, much like we do with wine, making sure that someone else's glass is topped up. It's good to make sure that everyone else's is topped up. If someone's older than you, you would make sure theirs is topped up. So there's kind of let's call it culture around it. It sounds like a drinking culture around it, but it's more to do with it's part of being together as a group, drinking together, eating together, celebrating. So, yes.
It's called soju.
Soju, yes.
Soju.
Yes.
Gosh, sorry. Apologies to everybody.
Barrage.
to all of our Korean listeners.
Thank you very much for bringing this. Yeah,
this is brilliant.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Cool. Right, are you guys ready for a listener question? This is from our friend Armand, who's previously sent in some questions and has given us a little update, which is great. Let me just get it up. Hello, not Josh, Josh, and Josh. Love that. Just listened to the podcast and I appreciate your insight and inspiring answers to my previous questions. I've been working hard on my Old Dominion army and did manage to play a few games with them. That's great. I look forward to trying out large blocks as suggested in the meme list example. I would like to ask 2 follow-up questions. Okay, so he's asked 2. I think we'll go with one this podcast and maybe we'll do the second one another time. So the first one is, I will be running a local tournament in May. This will be my first experience running a Conquest tournament and our community is quite young. Do you have any suggestions on prepping for multiple games for newer players? Any tricks on how to speed up play since games will have a round time? Well, first of all, just want to say, Armand, well done for getting into Conquest. And as much as I despise the amount of cleave in the faction, Old Dominion, well done. Yeah, I personally don't have a huge amount of experience running tournaments. I know we've obviously played a lot of games, but and I've been at a few tournaments, and I think maybe there's a couple of things that I feel like I'd be able to be like, oh, this was a good thing that I enjoyed. But I think when it comes to the actual nitty gritty, I feel like personally I don't have too much of an idea. But thankfully, we have someone who might have a little bit of an idea about how to run a tournament.
Who's that?
Yeah, I don't know. I think you're walking in a minute now. Yeah, Jamie, I know you've run. You've run a few. You ran the last Bad Moon event we went to.
Yes.
Which I must say was excellently run. I thought it went really well. Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on this question?
Yeah, sure. So I'm by no means an expert in this. I've ran, I think, 2 or 3 tournaments over my long career, one of Conquest and some of other systems as well. Probably in the general point is, I would say, is just try and be a little bit early and try and be clear with the players. Generally speaking, everyone's there to have a good time, and whatever you say, people will get on board with. So don't be afraid to make calls. If you need to be strict on round times because the store is gonna close, or you've only got certain bookings, be firm about it. Do feel free to go up to them and say, look, really sorry guys, but you've got 5 minutes and then it's dice down. We're going to have to pack up and move on. So keep momentum going is probably the main thing on from there. And don't be afraid to do it. Everyone else will appreciate it because ultimately you're doing the hard work of running on the day. In terms of the specific one about round timings, probably the first question almost back would be, what size event are you running? So the one we ran at Bad Moon was 1,500 points, which I think is a really good size. It's not too big to overwhelm a newer player, but there's enough going on that you can still use the full scenario pack with the balances on there. 2 hours 15, I think, is the round time we managed to work for, and I think pretty much everyone completed, if not completed the whole game of all 10 rounds, they got enough turns in that there was a decisive winner. Especially that smaller point game, sometimes by turn 5, turn 6, you've already got a clear winner of who's got that. So I would focus more on letting the players play through the game in their own pace, get maybe to turn 5, turn 6, and then, if needs be, come over and just help them talk through the endpoints of the game. A goes, this play scores this zone, this probably kills that. Maybe a supremacy roll to work out who gets the first charge off. But I find you can sometimes resolve that just at the end, and it helps people think the game through. So, in short, go for a smaller point size. I'd recommend 1,500, maybe 1,000 points if it's a very new community and you're all building up. You may want to look at a different scenario packet, in that case, from the core rulebook that does the 4x4 ones. I think those work quite well at the smaller games. And then, just in effect, drive the event. Be firm. Don't be afraid to keep the momentum moving and stick the timings you've got. It will pay off because everyone will feel organised. Those are probably the 2 main things to say. It's a really rewarding thing to do, and I highly recommend it. Best of luck.
Yeah, great.
Let us know how it goes.
Yeah,
definitely. Please.
And I think part of the question was for the newer players, what would be the good advice for them in terms of their preparation? And I think my experience, particularly for that first LGT, which was the first ever tournament that I'd ever really played in, the thing that helped me was just deciding a list quite well in advance and running lots of practice games with that same list, just to get used to how the cards work together. So I'm not sort of making little changes and I'm sort of getting confused on the day, because that's quite frustrating. And a silly little tip in terms of helping to keep to time, I'm useless at remembering the stat lines for my units. as you probably all experienced, as I've been running Abominations for 2 years and still don't know what their defense stat is. I printed off the stat blocks in quite a small font and then slotted those into the same card sleeves I used for the actual cards. And so that meant that when I drew the card, it was already right there in front of me. So I didn't have to be going to the book or bringing up my phone just to speed things along a little bit. But it is possible to play a short game, even though when we casually play, it goes on for 2 or 3 times as long.
I think as well, one thing that LGT did really well, depending on how you do terrain, is their 2D terrain, which I think for Conquest is probably the best type of terrain to use, but they had a little terrain help sheet.
Yes.
And that was so good, because as those of us who haven't really played terrain loads, knowing what hindering was versus obstructing and all the rest, having a little sheet with it just there, oh, I've gone through this, that means I'm not inspired, or oh, that's in the way, that means it affects my volley, was just super helpful, really sped up the game. And definitely using 2D terrain as well frees up your movement, because we've done a few tournaments now with physical terrain, and it can sometimes congest up the board, which can make the game fun in a different way, but depending on what army you can play, that can be, either beneficial or quite frustrating. But yeah.
I'll throw one afterburn as well, actually, from specifically the Bad Moon experience. If you're running the event, if there's space, absolutely play along, bring your army, have some games as well. I highly recommend, though, that you automatically give your opponent the win at the start, and you effectively don't compete at the event.
Right.
So regardless of the result of your game with the opponent, you're not placing and competing, because it will free up your mind to not care about the game so much, and you can walk away to go do rules changes. If you need to call something early to go and prepare for the next round or organise lunch, whatever, you can just walk away from that game. It doesn't affect their score or the end state. So for the Bad Moon event, I played the bye. Whoever played me always won the game, and they would earn whatever scenario points they would earn against me. So they had to fight for something. They had to still try and get points off me, but they would get a win no matter what. I would always score 0. So again, particularly for newer players where you might have more rules questions or more decisions to make, I would suggest just make life easy for yourself. Play games if you can, if there's a reserve player, but don't compete. You'll still get your games.
Yeah. I guess it's it might be also, just on a side note, it might be a bad look if you run a tournament and then end up winning it. It's like, great, guys, thanks so much for coming along to my victory.
But great for the ego.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just going to present myself with my own prize.
Yeah, I think maybe one last point I'd make, just from my perspective, just from the perspective of being a new player as well. When we first started, I think we got our rules wrong so many times, and like we'd often just drop something in our group chat and just be like, oh, by the way, I think we got the charge rules completely wrong. And I think that was obviously quite a nice organic way of like learning the rules and stuff. I think something that might be helpful is having like a cheat sheet. So I think the thing you mentioned about the terrain, Josh, about how at LGT we had those little terrain cheat sheets, I think it might take a little bit of time to do, because I don't think there's any officially created cheat sheets, but I think if you can maybe put down the rule, like what are the in combat and out combat actions, and like how do you resolve, how do you do clashes, how do you do those things, and just kind of put like little bits of information on a piece of A4 paper, print out a bunch of those, and then it means all the new players who come along, they have like a sheet they can refer to, so it at least means you're not going to get bombarded with questions as much as you would without that. So yeah, it's a bit of work, but I think ultimately would probably help you out in the long run.
Oh, they're super helpful, and there's definitely some floating around. I remember at the first LGT, Scott sent me one to print out for him, and then I was like, this is amazing, I'm going to print one out for me too. And again, just so helpful, just having rules that you're not just checking like once a game, but usually every turn, not having to open a rule book, but just having them all there on one sheet. Super, super helpful. Makes a big difference.
At the risk of a minor plug, I've actually just remembered. So I do content with Goonhammer, along with Zach and some others on there. Off the back of the Bad Moon event, I did an article 28th of February about running the event and a bit more detail about the prep I did and what the experience was like. I can put the link in the show notes, or otherwise get it out there as well. So if you want to have a bit more read of it, absolutely check out that article. If I do so myself, I think it's a decent read, but it's maybe gives you a bit more time than the ramblings from me and the sound advice from the other three gentlemen here.
Shameless plug. No, great. Thank you, Armand. We hope to hear again from you soon. So I think it'd be good to move on to the main topic for today. One thing, I think, obviously, Sam, I know you've been getting into Wardrune a bit and kind of dabbling in that. I think it would, for me, I feel like I know very little about the faction itself because I've barely played. Actually, Sam, I don't even think I've played you yet. Like,
really?
Yeah. I've just played your Spires. So I think at least for me, and I'm sure some of the listeners out there who either don't play Wardrune or haven't played against them, I think it would be interesting to hear a little bit more about them. Jamie, I know you're a seasoned veteran, so it'll be great to hear a couple of things. But yeah, so tell us about the Wardrune. How do they play? Maybe a bit of the lore if you want to, but yeah, I think kind of what's the dynamics of that.
I can speak very, very surface level about the lore because I am not a lore aficionado, and if anyone else here knows much more about the lore, particularly those who've been playing longer than me, feel free to jump in and correct me. But the Wardrune, I believe the Wardrune are a failed experiment from the Spires, if memory serves. They're sort of an abandoned outcast child that fled off into the wastes. This sort of superhuman, like 7 foot tall giant green orc type monsters. They formed a bond with the dinosaurs, and now you have a really cool army of orcs riding dinosaurs with a sort of a Mesoamerican tribalistic kind of bit mixed with sort of more modern interpretation of dinosaurs, where they got feathers and things on them as well. So that if that doesn't sell you, then I'm not sure why you're listening to this episode, to be honest.
Yeah.
Orcs and dinosaurs. In terms of on the table, the best description I've found for them is they are actually an elf faction pretending to be orcs. This is not your cry warg, charge forward and smash. This is a fragile, elite, specialist army that requires some finesse and planning to play. It's if you play it like a Warhammer Orc army, you're probably gonna have a bad time. It plays much more like an Eldar or a High Elf kind of army from other game experiences there. The core game mechanic, I think, as everyone's familiar with, if they don't understand indeed, is the chant mechanic, which I would contest is possibly one of the hardest, if not the hardest, unique faction game ability in Conquest, possibly competing with Spires. Sam, I don't know what you think between the two, having played a little bit of both. Is Spires more complicated?
Spires, it was horrible.
Well, with my experience, the only reason why I've ended up playing Wardrune is because I have a drum beast. So the route in is only sort of driven by there being a drum beast, and as a result of the drum beast being on the table, I certainly agree that chants are complex and extremely annoying at sometimes. Actually, the way that I have ended up running it is with this seemingly endless cycle of markers being added before I do the chant at the time that I want to. So I sort of see that it is existing and see that there needs to be a level of thought put towards it, but it's more annoying than anything else. Whereas with Spires, there's this definite need to get the card order so pinpoint correct when you prepare the deck at the beginning of the turn that if one unit dies when I'm running my Spires list, it's quite likely they're going to lose this entire turn, because when I draw my card, I didn't know that was going to die at the time, and therefore I now can't do the Ferromancy I wanted to, or this Biomancy is going to be activating the wrong unit. So I think it's probably the presence of the Drum Beast has made me feel like Spires is more complex. Having said that, I have lost a lot as Wardrune, and it may be specifically down to that. So.
No, I think that's very fair because, and it's a good thing for anyone coming in. If you are struggling to get your head around chants and get the timings of it down, a drum beast is a great model. What the mechanic is in very brief. Whenever a Wardrune unit activates, if it started the round on the board, it generates a token based off whatever cult it follows. There is famine, there is war, and there is death. There's an extra fourth one called Conquest, but we'll cover that in a second. Once you have 3 tokens in the sequence, and you activate a regiment, you must chant the battle cry, which will then let you apply buffs to that regiment based off of the number of tokens of the number of sequences. The reason the fourth cult is separate is effectively it's a wild card. The Conquest chant can be any of the other three. So when you chant, you pick one of the other three cults, the token becomes that kind. That is a very quick version of the chant mechanic. First of all, if you're playing Wadron, make sure your opponent can clearly see your chant sequence and tokens. It's important information for them to be able to know, because it can give away how quickly you're going into a big activation. Wadron tends to activate every 3 rounds because you build up to 3 tokens for your maximum benefits, and then you send in your heavy hitter and get something done. If your opponent looks across and you see there's no tokens on the board, you might actually say, they've probably got an activation before they're going to do something big. But likewise, because the tokens last between rounds, if someone starts their turn with 2 tokens in the sequence at the start, they're probably going to go in for a big play for turn 1. What that leads into is probably another general Wadron aspect, which is they're a tempo faction. Sounds weird given we're talking about chants. But they tend to play a smaller command stack, I find. You tend to have less units because you're quite often wanting to go first, maybe do multiple activations using your characters, because you need to get the chants active. You need to be getting the impact out of these elite units and getting them to do the work. It's all well and good having a chant that gives you +1 defense, +1 resolve, blessed, counterattack, loads of defensive buffs. But if that unit goes last in this deck, you're not getting any value out of it. Same for things like Bastion or other ones where you activate early on. You want to get those effects out. So a lot of Wadron is about timing. I tend to find it's a faction that wants to take the initiative. You want to be taking control of the battle. You want to be pushing the offense into the opponent rather than something maybe more like Dwagone, which can take a much higher stack, wait out the activations and respond. Or City States is another good example. Using their reserve stack, they want to wait and see what you do and then respond. Yeah, sorry, quite a long sort of opening spiel there, but
that's great.
Does that match your lived experience across the table from Wadron?
Yeah, it does feel like every now and then, like, they'll just do something when the regiments be like, I see them turn some cards over, and then suddenly they roll a ton of dice, and then suddenly all my guys die, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to trust you that was fair, but that feels horrible. So yeah, definitely that 1 every 3 turn, yeah, that rings true of just, yeah, them just doing something really horrible.
I mean, for what it's worth, in the semi-finals of the LGT last year, I got to play the Wadron Mirror match. It's miserable. It's a glass cannon off, and I played against my evil doppelganger, Wadron James.
Yes.
My Christian name is actually James, so there are 2 Wadron Jameses. We both had Tontaurs. We had both a big unit of Raptors. We had probably about 60% of our list was identical. It was a cracking game. He is an absolute gentleman. But it was... We had a question about chance that was so complex that the TOs had to get on the phone on WhatsApp to the game designer to understand which way a specific nuanced chant activation worked. So it's okay not to understand it.
Yeah,
it's a weird rule.
Sorry, I was going to say in medieval history, I know there's been a sort of a tradition of setting up anti-popes, and I feel like we have set up you as our antithesis to the other Wadron James. So you are now our pope. You are now our Wadron James.
There can only
for
be
this
one
podcast. Yeah, exactly. So just roll ones. Beware.
Oh no.
I'm going to start wearing Hawaiian shirts next, and Aaron's going to be writing letters of complaint. So my experience as an extremely early player into Wadron, I've probably got about 1,800 points-ish now, and which is primarily been driven by, I like the look of the models of a couple of units, and so bought those and then constructed a legal list that allows me to play those, and that's basically how I've gone. And because of the way the chant mechanic works, it's quite confusing for me to work out which units I like and don't like on the board, because actually with Spires, whether you've got all the buffs and everything, actually force-grown drones are useless on their own, and it's quite transparent how useless they are. Whereas the Abomination runs very fast, does a lot of hits, and is going to die quite quickly. And it does that consistently across every game. Whereas with the Wadroon, it feels like after one battle, I come to the end of it and go, oh, those veterans do really well. Oh, I'm definitely going to bring them out next time. And then the next time I bring them out and they immediately die without having done anything. And I'm guessing it's because of the way the chants happen to have worked in that instance. So it's quite hard to predict on the other side of the table, just looking at the units visually, oh, should I be scared of that? Or should I be scared of the other thing? Because actually each one has been threatening and each one has been, the weak link.
Well, there's, it's interesting there because I think there is one actual thing which generally helps understand Wadron as well, which is wound count. All Wadron units have at least 5 wounds. Quite a few of them have 6, including their basic infantry. One unit has wounds 7. The Chosen of Conquest are 7 wounds apiece, which, given they just look like slightly bigger orcs with 2 axes, as opposed to the Blooded, who are slightly smaller orcs with 2 axes, can be quite deceptive. That's before you throw in things like an Apex, which is 15 wounds, or the Tonsil, which is like 26, I think. It's too many wounds.
So many.
Try and avoid going into like lots of stat changes, but the reason why I mention is because the base stat blocks are very deceptive. When you look at the chant tables, given there's 3 tiers for each of the 4 cults, you effectively have 12 different modifiers you could apply to every single unit. And that can change them from offensively, defensively, armor piercing, maneuverability. And unless you have the fanatic rule, you don't have to chant the cult that unit has. So let's say you have a unit of Blooded, which is the double axe guys, and you've got them in the cult of Famine, which is charge further and other stuff. If you have other tokens in your sequence that aren't Famine, you can still, like, say you had 2 death tokens, you could chant death on that unit to turn it into something else a bit different. So it's all the units are very modular, and it makes it very fun when you can sort of hot swap in and out and pick different cults, but very hard to tell, especially across the board. What is that unit do? Is that going to clear light infantry? Is that an anvil? Is that gonna delete an armored unit? It's hard to predict. I think, from across the table.
So my experience, obviously, as a 100 Kingdoms player, only ever having played 100 Kingdoms, you want to put units together that will complement other regiments, and there's a plethora of different upgrade options that you can include that allow you to do different things. So I think I'd probably say that 100 Kingdoms has the most amount of viable builds. If they will all at some point include some Ash and Dawn, but I'd say there is probably the most variety. Like, all infantry armies, great. All cavalry armies, great. Combined arms, great. And you can kind of go mix and match, have a bit of magic, great. But the way they actually play is very, very simple. And it's kind of just like, I can focus on putting things, I can focus on placement, on all of that sort of stuff. Whereas on that scale of complexity in list building versus complexity in play, obviously Wadroon are very heavy on the complexity in play. Do you feel like there's complexity in the list building as well, or do you feel like because it's so modular you can almost take anything and it's going to work in your favor?
It's a really, really good question, I guess, and I think part of it does come from the design. You design units to have certain roles, same as with any faction, but you have a bit more control over what the unit might do. Give an example. One of the things you might commonly come across is what's effectively known as the big block of Braves. The Braves are the spear and shield guys. They are base infantry. They're relatively cheap. They are defense 3 with shields, like fairly tough guys. You can make them very defensive. You can apply multiple defensive buffs on them so they become a really nice anvil. You can give them healing so it just doesn't budge anywhere. But with a different chant and maybe a different character in there to give them flurry or something like that, they actually hit quite hard because they've all got support too. And you could give them things that make you defense 0 if you roll a 1 to hit. So that same unit could fulfill 2 different roles depending on how you use the chance and how you set it up, which I know is true in a lot of cases, but I think in other factions it's a bit more, you take the unit and the unit already has a role, whether it is chaff, whether it is armor piercing, fastment, whatever it is, and then you will take things that buff that unit to make it better at that role it's already designed for. Wadger's a bit more like you've got something that's kind of leaning one way, but it could lean in other ways depending what you want to do with it.
And it could switch halfway through a game because you could buff it defensively in one round, then that unit's gone. And so, okay, next round we're going to charge, and we're going to charge a long distance and hit you harder. So
yeah, potentially. But yeah, otherwise, as I think that as a general rule, they've got a lot of wounds, more than you expect. So be prepared to put more attacks into them than you think you need. And they can be unpredictable, but watch the opponent's chance sequence. Make sure you know even if you don't know what they are, know how many cards there are, because that will give you vital information on what they're going to do next.
Something's going to happen. Yeah. Okay.
I'm happy to talk about more specifics about where Wadger's at the moment, but I'm conscious that there is discussion at the moment from Parabellum the next faction rework. When they do the FAQs every couple of months, they tend to take one of the factions and go a bit deeper into it, look at some core mechanics. I think Spires had a recent one. Did they looking at the Highborn lineage, perhaps?
Well, there's a new lineage Prideborn rumour, which I don't know anything about, but I just keep seeing that name around, so I'm looking forward to seeing it.
yeah, could well be. The Dwergom had a big one just after the LGT, in fact, just before the LGT, about the spell casting and things. So the Wadron are due this. The suggestion is that Parabellum do want to look at chance and make it more approachable. So all of this is time-stamped. Might be different in however long after you're listening to this.
Yeah, I mean, when this inevitably comes out in December 2026.
I've got a question for you. With the chance, obviously you got to get 3 tokens, then you do it. Is there like certain regiments? Like, do you have a preference in your list? Like, is there like more expensive or more elite regiments that you feel like you are more likely to want to use the actual chant on and get the bonus off? Or do you feel like when you put an army set off and you've got like 6 or 7 regiments, do you feel like it's equal what regiment you'd use your chance on?
I think you do set up certain regiments to be able to capitalize on it. So again, another question to work out. Pretty much every Wadron list will take an artifact called the Mantle of the Devoted. The Mantle of the Devoted gives the character's unit Fanatic. It lets them access that secret 3rd tier, which could be a 3rd action. It could be getting blessed. It could be impact hits and glorious charge. It could be all sorts of things. But it also always counts them as an extra token in the sequence, so they can accelerate very quickly. What you quite often see is you might have no tokens on the sequence. Character in the regiment goes first, adds a token, immediately activates into its regiment, adds a 2nd token. They're Fanatic, so they now count as having 3, and so you've gone in effectively 1 activation. You've got a fully powered up unit which does, marches, 16 inches, charges you and clashes you or something like that. You can do some horrible stuff with it. So whichever unit has the Mantle of the Devoted, watch out for that one. That's going to do unpleasant stuff. Otherwise, yeah, you probably have certain units that are set up to benefit from more often, but you can switch. I've had range units going with charges using melee buffs and do a surprising amount of work. Just because they suddenly get +1 clash, they get relentless blows, or other things in there, and actually that random unit of guys with slings suddenly is lifting stands pretty comfortably. So all list builds are going to be in flux because there's regular balance patches, and what's good 6 months ago isn't so good now, or what was good now might not be good in 6 months. So all advice from there, but generally speaking, as things currently stand, you're probably going to be having there's 2 generalist warlords who always bring a very flexible warband: the Matriarch Queen and the Chieftain. They've got a lot of different units they can take, both chaff, sort of cheap infantry, some ranged, some armor piercing with a T-Rex or Warbred, and then the other characters, the Predator, the Scion, and the Thunder Chieftain, are more specialist if you want to bring in a big unit of Thunder Riders for a bunch of Triceratops killing a bunch of things. Or do you want to have a mobile ranged unit with the Predator? Do you want a Scion casting magic for utility? So your core is probably going to be Matriarch or Chieftain, and then specialist characters based off what you want. Bit of a roundabout way. Does that answer the question at all?
Yeah, I think that's helpful. Yeah, definitely helpful. what I feel like I learnt from that was fear everything, because some slingers can suddenly ruin your day.
I was imagining, yeah, like hunters, like dudes with spears that they're meant to be throwing at you, right? Just like somehow getting blessed or like impacts and glorious charge. I mean, like what? That's great. Yeah, I think one of my questions was going to be, actually two of my questions were, how has the new mechanic with the character and then the regiment activation affected, which I think you've answered. And then also the question was going to be about how to beat a Wardrun army, and it seems to be watch out for the chant tokens, and basically especially watch out for the regiment with it is an officer, isn't it?
It's an artifact for a character, the Mantle of the Devoted.
Right, okay.
It used to work on, so if those remember the dark days of the triple action Tontor.
Yes.
Yeah. Mantle used to work on anything. It now only works on infantry models, so you can't have triple activating Tontors. The fastest, most durable, and one of the hardest hitting units in the game does not exist in the same way. You should all be happy.
Yeah. I mean, it was such a momentous occasion that I think Just Roll One's literally named their podcast in honor of the the fallen fanatic Tontor.
Yeah, I think the other thing in terms of defeating is I'd say probably in a good 20-30% of games I'll have nothing on the table by turn 10. I'll be tabled.
Right.
It's the best defense you're getting in this faction is 3. Everything else is usually 2s, maybe some evade, but defense 2 is not common, and the wounds disappear quick, and they're quite expensive. So you don't often have staying power on the board, particularly against some of the late game factions like Dwego and Old Dominion, who are quite happy grinding out to turn 10. I've definitely had games where I've had nothing left on the table, even before turn 10, and just hope that you've scored enough scenario points to stay ahead. So,
what's your resolve like? I know you said your defense is quite low. Are the resolve stats generally okay, or
2s and 3s generally? The big dinosaurs get to 4, but generally speaking, your defense and resolve is going to sit around that 2-3 kind of mark. So, yes, it's 5 wounds apiece, but you are getting damage through fairly reliably, even with smaller plinking shots and things like that.
One of the first units that I got was Hunting Pack, which I just thought, oh, beautiful. I like my Strix. I just want to have like loads of little creepy Velociraptor things. And the first charge that they did into somebody was beautiful. Like, look, they got all of these hits and they're hitting loads of them. Oh, this is loads of fun. And then they got hit back with a really weak attack,
like men at arms,
and immediately got broken. So I think they have 3 wounds a stand.
I do stand corrected. One Wardrun unit does not have 5 wounds or more. It is the Hunting Pack.
My one, yeah.
They have 3.
So I think that you use the term glass cannon. I think they do feel like an army where they look extremely intimidating, and then actually, if you get a good hit on them, then they do disappear as hard as they hit.
And it's interesting what you're saying about spires. How if one of your units gets taken out before it activates and it throws your whole deck out of sequence, it's awful for Wardrun because
right.
if you have say 8 cards in your stack to activate, you're looking at it saying not just what order do I want my units to go in, but when do I want these 3 tokens to hit? You can kind of stall them out a bit because characters don't activate the chant, but you still have to plan ahead and at the start of the turn, when am I getting my buffs? But if someone takes out an intervening unit, you don't get that chant. So instead of having 3 tokens where you wanted it, you might only have 2. And because unless you have the Drum Beast, if you have 3 tokens, you have to sing. Every Wardrun player has had moments when they've had their big melee buffs be sang on a range unit sat at the back of the corner.
Oh, yeah.
And then your melee unit goes with none of the fun stuff in there and bounces off what it goes into. It happens to everybody. So if you can kill a unit early on in the sequence, it might just throw everything out of whack, depending what the opponent wanted to do with it. So this is a terrible representation for Wardrun, isn't it? I'm telling you all how to understand what's going on so you can beat it. But yeah. Disregard everything I've said. Just accept your fate.
Just run into us head first. That's great. Yeah, Jamie, thank you so much. I think I feel a lot more enlightened as to Wardrun. I mean, I feel. I know you've said, "Oh, this is how to beat them," but I do feel more terrified of them now than I did before. But yeah, thanks so much for listening. Who would like to do the email?
I'm happy to go for it. Please send your stuff in to joshingaroundinair@gmail.com.
Well, thank you very much, and we will see you next time.
See you next
See you
time.
later.
Thank you.
At the getaway spot, West London pride, London boys, rolling the dice, feeling alive with the Joshing crew. You know, element it seems, warriors clash in a world of dreams. Gifts on the table, we raise a cheer. New drinks poured, full of good cheer. So let's roll the dice tonight. Dice tonight. Your luck's as golden as your moves, so we'll keep on gaming round the table. You got us feeling that groove, so let's keep on painting. Nice miniatures gleam. Your hands so steady, detailed and bright. Through the west, London haze, together we ride. London's pride, rolling the thunder, banners held high. With the West End Kings, no retreat, no defeat. Battles won on the tabletop, none can compete. Exchanging the gifts, each one